mystery writers. Welcome to Write a Killer Mystery. I'm Zara Altair. This is where we talk about making a good mystery great. And today I want to talk about narrative voice, how you tell your story. First, I want to thank my patrons on Patreon for their continued support of this video series and my writing. And if you'd like to join us, there's a link in the description below. So happy to see you there. Okay, let's just get right down to it. What is narrative voice? If you're new to writing, you may not be familiar with the term. What it means is the perspective from which your story is told. And it's that voice that guides the reader through the story's plot, characters, and events. It's the voice of the story. And there are essentially three main types of narrative voice. And I'm going to walk through each one. And each one has unique advantages and challenges. So we'll look at them all. And that will help you make a decision on what narrative voice to choose for your story. First-person narrative voice is when the story is told from the perspective of one of the characters in the story. Often in mysteries, it's from the perspective of the detective, but that isn't always true. Sometimes it's the detective's sidekick, for example, that actually tells the story. But the main point is the reader experiences the events of the story through the eyes of that character, hearing their thoughts and feelings about what's happening. Second person narrative voice is less common, and it's less common because it's very difficult to sustain throughout a novel, and it addresses the reader directly. You do this, you do that, you. That's the second person. It definitely creates a very immersive story, but it's an amazing challenge for a writer to sustain the second person voice throughout an entire novel. So especially if you're a beginning writer, you want to think seriously about choosing this second person as your narrative voice. And the third person narrative voice is the most common type used in mystery writing. It's told from the outside perspective, using pronouns like he or she to describe the actions and thoughts of the characters. And this type of voice can provide a very objective viewpoint, allowing the reader to see the story's big picture. So choosing the right voice, the right narrative voice for your mystery can make all the difference in how your reader feels about your story. So let's talk about how you choose your narrative voice. You can consider the story's tone, what tone you have in your story. It plays a significant role in determining the narrative voice that you choose. A first-person narrative voice may be the best option if your story is lighthearted and whimsical. And a third-person narrative voice might be more suitable if your story is dark and mysterious, and certainly that's both ends of the spectrum, and you may be somewhere in between. So you also want to think about your audience. Who is your target audience? Who are the people who are going to love reading your story? What type of narrative voice really resonates with them? If you're writing for a younger audience, you probably want to use first person. It is the most popular with young readers, and it's very engaging. Whereas an older audience may prefer a third person voice. And then you want to determine your reader's level involvement in your story. So how much do you want them to be involved in your story? If you want deeply immersed in the story, and they actually take on the role of one of the characters, first person narrative voice is going to bring them right into that story and completely immerse them from that character's perspective. All right. Um, and if your readers like to observe the story and think about it, they're probably going to be they'll probably resonate more with third person. So you do want to think about your audience when you're choosing your narrative voice. And then another thing that can affect the voice is your protagonist's personality. Um, if your story centers around one main character, your detective, you want to consider their personality and how it comes across in your story and your narrative voice as part of what reveals that character's personality. If your character is quirky and has a very unique perspective on the world, a first-person narrative voice may be the best option to showcase that quirky personality, because they're going to have all sorts of comments and observations about the world around them. And if you're first starting out, I really encourage you to experiment. And every time I start a series, I experiment with the first person and the third person and what feels more comfortable for me to write that particular character. And I've done both first person and third person. And for me personally, it really depends on the character and how I want to portray them. So I encourage you to experiment, maybe write a chapter or two in first person and a chapter or two in the third person, and see how it reads, yes, of course, but also see how you feel writing with that particular narrative voice. You may be much more comfortable with one narrative voice than with another narrative voice. All right. It's a super important choice. So you want to make sure that you choose something that you feel you can sustain throughout the entire novel. Remember, you're going to be writing like 300 pages or so. So you want to be comfortable with that narrative voice that you choose. So consider the tone of the story, your audience, and your character, and your comfort level writing, because they all have a bearing on what your choice is. So let's do a little bit deeper dive into each of these choices for narrative voice, so you have a better idea of what they are. All right. The first person perspective is very common in mystery stories. It's your detective telling the story, giving the readers an inside look into your protagonist's mind and their thoughts and their feelings. And that point of view can create a very immersive experience for the reader. And it also has limitations. So one of the best things about the first person is that it lets the reader see the story through that main character's eyes. It really connecting with your reader, and your reader sees everything in the story through that character's point of view. And it creates a very strong bond of your reader with your reader and your main character. But I want to talk for a minute about the limitations of the first-person point of view. Your reader has a limited view of everything that's happening in the story, and they only see what that character sees, and they only relate to the experiences that character has. Um, and this can be a problem for mystery stories where there are often many characters and twists in the plot that that main character, that first person character, may not know about. So that's one problem with the first person. Um, Another problem is that it can be hard to keep up over the course of a whole book because you're always writing I. It's this person. You really have to get into your character and know their point of view and know their perceptions and options, and you can't go out of their head. You only tell the story from their perspective. All right. So it's a great way to tell a mystery story because it gives the reader that personal connection. But before you make your choice, just consider what some of the obstacles are writing in first person. Um, it's essential to weigh the pros and cons of what you're choosing. I'm going to skip over talking about in depth about the second person point of view because I don't recommend it for beginning writers. It's just very, very difficult for even seasoned writers to maintain the second person point of view. So I'm going to jump right into the third person perspective, and it is a classic choice for mystery writers. Most mystery stories are told from the third person point of view, which lets the readers look at the story from an unbiased point of view. In this narrative voice, the protagonist is he or she, and the reader can gain a wider perspective on the whole entire story. One of the best things about the third person point of view is that it can help the reader understand the story in a more complete, comprehensive way. It lets the author show off more characters and storylines and makes the mystery more complex and interesting. And it can also be an effective way to build suspense as the reader is aware of more information. Oftentimes, they have more information than the protagonist has at that moment in time in the story. It's a voice many readers are used to. They're very comfortable reading third person, and it makes it a great choice for writers who want to reach as many people as possible. But even the third person has limitations, so it can make the reader feel less connected to the main character and making it harder for them to relate to that character and feel like they really know them. And it can also be hard to keep a consistent narrative voice throughout your novel, because the reader sees things from many different points of view. So um, there you go. The third person is a classic choice for mystery writers, and it's popular with readers, so you're not going to have any problem with that. It's really going to be up to you to choose what feels most comfortable for you, first person or third person, in telling your story. And then one more thing I want to add to that is about the tone of your story and how that can affect the narrative voice and how they work together, because they set the mood for your mystery story. Depending on the type of story you're writing, the tone can be dark or sarcastic or level-headed or witty or any combination of these things. So adding tone to your narrative voice is essential because it sets your story's overall mood and atmosphere. And your reader's going to know right away, is this the kind of story I want to read, whether it's told in first person or third person? That tone is going to influence their response to your writing style. So adding narrative voice is essential because it sets your story's overall tone and mood well, mood and atmosphere, and it helps the reader connect. So let's talk about different kinds of tones in your story. First of all, there's the classic dark tone, the noir tone, and it creates a sense of foreboding and suspense in your story. It uses descriptive language and metaphors to help convey a sense of danger and intrigue. Right? If you've ever read a classic noir detective story, you know what that dark tone is like. And then there's the witty tone, and that can add a lighthearted element to your mystery, making it more entertaining for the reader. Using humor and sarcasm can help create a more relatable, engaging narrative voice. And remember, if you're going to do this, you have to sustain it throughout your novel. So you need to be very comfortable. It needs to come naturally to you. For instance, for me, being witty and sarcastic, I can't carry it off throughout a whole novel, so it's not part of my overall tone. All right? And a sarcastic tone. A sarcastic tone can add a layer of irony to your story, and it can create a sense of detachment from the events of the story, allowing the reader to view events objectively because they're getting this sarcastic conveyance of the story. All right. And then there's the level-headed tone, and that has to do with a very um, thoughtful detective. It creates an objective perspective that invites the reader to go along sort of guessing with the detective what's going on, which clues are real and which ones are false, that sort of thing. Um, with the right narrative voice and tone, you can create a mystery story that keeps your readers reading, and that's what you want. So you want to make sure that your tone and your voice match, and most importantly, that you can carry them off throughout the whole story. So you want to make sure that your writing style works with that narrative voice and works with the tone that you want to create. In other words, you don't want to start with one tone and then shift in the middle of your story because it's too hard for you to write that tone. So you need to be very comfortable choosing the tone and the voice that you want. So combining that voice and that tone are really part of your craft as a writer in creating your story. It's going to make all the difference whether you choose first person or third person, and adding that right tone can help you create a unique and memorable story. There's no one size fits all. It's really up to you how you want to define your detective, how you want to define how you tell the story, how much intimacy you want with your protagonist, and how much you want your reader to engage emotionally with your detective rather than just solving the mystery puzzle. So, whether you're a seasoned writer or just beginning, experiment with different narrative voice and experiment with tone to make sure that you're really comfortable writing with that narrative voice and that tone, and that it's something that you feel you can emotionally your emotional level that you can sustain throughout 300 or so pages. Your readers will be happy with your combination when you get it right for you. That's it. It's like as authors, we have so many choices to make, and narrative voice and tone really impact how our readers respond to our stories. So give it some thought, do some experimentation, write in first person and write in third person. See how much you want to be, if you're drawn to being witty and sarcastic. See if you can write maybe 3 chapters doing that, because you're going to be writing the whole book with that without being heavy-handed. You don't want to be heavy-handed with wit and sarcasm. You really want to focus on this story. So there's a lot to think about, a lot to practice, but I hope this helps you make a clear decision. And thank you very much for being here. And also, each one of these episodes on Write a Killer Mystery goes into some depth about some aspect of mystery writing. There really are many aspects to writing a mystery novel. And if you want the basics, you can take the Write a Killer Mystery course, which is going to give you the basics. It starts with your story idea and how you can test it to see if you can sustain that idea through an entire novel, through all of character development and setting and story and planning your clues and hiding the villain, all the aspects that it takes to put a mystery together. So you're going to get the basics and write a killer mystery. And then if you keep tuning in to these weekly episodes, you're going to have a more in-depth look at the various aspects of writing your mystery. There's a link to Write a Killer Mystery, the course, in the description below, so go check it out and see if you think it's something that will help you start writing a really great mystery. All right, thank you so much for being here, and keep writing. If you like this episode, don't forget to subscribe and click that little notification bell, and I will see you next time. Keep writing.